Hi all. In this video, we're going to be talking about the various functions of noun phrases. So just as a reminder, noun phrase is a form, not a function. So you can have a noun phrase, but the function that it fills in a sentence is going to vary. So what we're going to be talking about today is going to be how to identify those functions. So as you see here, the first two that we're going to talk about is the noun phrase as the subject and the noun phrase as the direct object. And I have a sentence for us at the bottom. So these sentences come from Sarah J. Maas's Court of Thorns and Roses. I thought it would be nice to be working with actual published text, so that's what we're going to do. So the sentence that we're looking at is Tamlin and Lucian noticed my mood. So we're going to go ahead and start by talking about the form of each of these words, and then we'll finish by talking about the function. Okay. So Tamlin, hopefully everybody remembers, would be a proper noun, right? Just like Lucian would be a proper noun. And is what is called a coordinating conjunction, right? In this case, it connects both of these nouns in what is a noun phrase, right? So this is our first noun phrase. So we'll even call it noun phrase number one. Okay. So Tamlin and Lucian, right, are our occasion for the sentence. And so we'll talk about their function in just a little bit, but I want to finish talking about the remainder of the words. So noticed is a verb. It's a past tense verb. We'll talk a little bit more about tense in relationship to the trees in just a little bit, but it's on its own, so it forms a verb phrase by itself. Then we have my, which is a possessive pronoun. And we have mood, which is a noun, right? So possessive pronoun and a noun is going to be another noun phrase. So this is noun phrase number two. And noticed my mood. So if you remember, we're going to have our subject predicate split, which happens up here, right at the top of this. S weirdly stands for clause instead of sentence. You can just think about it as sentence if that's helpful. So this is where our subject predicate split happens. So here we have our predicate phrase. Okay. So these are the forms, right? What we're looking at up here are the forms of words, right? Down here, what we're looking at are the functions. So that is what these forms are doing. So let's talk a little bit about that, right? Tamlin and Lucian. So here we have, right, and which functions as a connector. Okay. And then we have Tamlin and Lucian, who are the occasion for the sentence, right? They're the ones doing the noticing. So as a result, both Tamlin and Lucian are going to function as subjects. So I have the S, right? And I'm going to go ahead and write up here that noun phrase number one is an example of how a noun phrase can function as a subject, right? Noticed is going to be our predicate, right? My is a possessive pronoun, so it functions as a determiner. Mood is going to be the head word for this noun phrase. And so this entire phrase is the direct object, right? Tamlin and Lucian are different from my mood. So it's introducing new information. And so as a result of that, it's not a subject complement. Instead, it is a direct object. So the direct object here is noun phrase number two. Okay, so in both instances, we have a noun phrase. That form doesn't change, but the function does. So on one hand, it's functioning as a subject, and on the other hand, it's functioning as a direct object. So that's where we have a variety of different functions that a noun phrase can fill. So let's go ahead and continue. We're going to go ahead and take a look at how a noun phrase can function as a subject complement. So those waters were a death trap. So this is the sentence we're going to be looking at. So those, we have a demonstrative pronoun, and you'll notice that I'm going to do a little bit of abbreviating. Waters is a noun, and a demonstrative pronoun plus a noun is going to give us a noun phrase, right? Were is going to be a verb, and that is going to form our verb phrase. A is an indefinite article, right? Death. Now, this becomes an interesting word, right? One of the questions for us is how is it functioning here? So death, we could say the death. We could say the deaths. Here it's doing something a little bit interesting. We can't really say death ear or deathiest or many or like more death or most death. So really what we have is a noun, right? But it's not functioning as a noun. So this is where things get interesting. And then trap is also a noun. So indefinite article noun noun gives us another noun phrase. Our verb phrase plus our noun phrase. So we're a death trap together will be our predicate phrase because we have our subject predicate split that happens right up here. So let's go ahead then and talk about the functions a little bit. So the demonstrative pronoun those is going to be a determiner. Waters would be the head word for this noun phrase, which means together, especially if we're looking at the subject predicate split up at the top, we have our subject. Those waters is our subject. So this noun phrase number one, right, equals subject. Then we have our verb phrase. So that is our predicate. A, the indefinite article is a determiner. Now here, death, even though it's a noun, modifies trap, right? So it's a modifier. So this is a really good illustration of when you could have like a class of word that functions like a different class of word. So here you have a noun that's functioning like an adjective, okay? And then trap would be the head word for our noun phrase. Now, if we look at those waters and we're saying they were something, a death trap and waters refer to the same thing. And so that means that what we have here is a subject complement rather than a direct object. So here, the subject complement is the same as noun phrase number two. So once again, we have two noun phrases. One of them functions like a subject, one of them functions like a subject complement. So again, identifying the same types of form, but their function is different. Next up, we have a noun phrase as an indirect object. So let's talk a little bit about this one. So he gave me space. Okay. He is going to be a pronoun. And on its own, that's going to be a noun phrase, right? So we've already identified one noun phrase. Gave is going to be a verb, and that's our verb phrase. Me is going to be another pronoun, right? So we have another noun phrase on its own. It's not my, so it's not possessive. So it's just a pronoun on its own. And then space is a noun, so we have another noun phrase. So this is actually noun phrase number three, and this is noun phrase number two based on the order as we're seeing it. Okay. And then gave me space altogether is our predicate phrase. Okay. So we once again have our subject predicate split, which means he is functioning as our subject. Gave is functioning as our predicate. So now we have me and space to contend with. So this is where looking at an indirect object gets interesting. The direct object is directly kind of associated with the predicate. Okay. An indirect object introduces new information, so kind of a third bit of information, but it's not the results of the direct action of the predicate. That is why it's indirect. So let's take a look at this, right? He gave me. Me is not actually being given. Okay. The me is receiving something. What is being given is the space, right? So he gave space. Maybe he's stepping back, maybe he's doing something else, but space is what is being given. So as a result of that, space is actually our direct object, even though it appears at the end of the sentence. Now, that space is something he is giving, right, to me. So he's not giving me, he's giving space to me, which means that me here is actually our indirect object. So I'm going to write down phrase number 2 here, and we're going to take a look at this for just a minute. Another way of writing this sentence would be he gave space to me. And usually, if you're dealing with an indirect object, you should be able to kind of put it at the end of the sentence and attach it to a preposition. And that will be a good indicator that what you're dealing with is a direct object. Another way to think about it is that we have one kind of bit of information here with he. We have a second bit of information with space, and we have a third bit, right, with me. So each of these introduces, and I'll write it here, introduces new information. And so as a result, right, we have kind of 3 distinct bits of information. So a noun phrase functioning as a subject, which is information 1, right? Noun phrase functioning as a direct object, which is noun phrase number 3, so space. And then noun phrase number 2 is me, which is the indirect object. And just as an example, right, you wouldn't say he gave me, period. You'd be like, what did he give you? If you said he gave space, that is maybe a little awkward, but it's technically okay, right? And so you can have that subject verb direct object construction. You cannot have subject verb indirect object. All right, let's take a look next at object complement, which is going to be similar to a subject complement. So an object complement, and I'll just kind of write it right here, restates the direct object. So it's kind of an essential part of the sentence, or it doesn't stand on its own in that way. So we're going to take a look at what that looks like. All right, so once again, let's talk about our forms. They is a pronoun, so it's a noun phrase on its own. Called is a verb, so it's a verb phrase. Her, here, right, we could say like her ball, and it would be a possessive pronoun, but it's not followed by a noun here. It's followed by a direct, or it's followed by a direct article, which means that there's not like a noun. You wouldn't say like her the. So as a result, it's just functioning like a standard pronoun here. So we have a separate noun phrase. So we have noun phrase number 1, noun phrase number 2. The is a definite, that's the word I was looking for, definite pronoun, or sorry, definite article. Mixing up my words just a little bit. Article. And never fading flower. There are 3 words here, but they're all capitalized. So that tells us that what we're dealing with is a proper noun. So the definite article plus the proper noun is another noun phrase. This would be noun phrase 3. And then over here, we have our predicate phrase. And then we have our usual subject predicate split. So let's talk about functions then. They is the occasion for the sentence, so it's our subject. Called is our verb phrase, so it's going to be our predicate. Her, right? So they called her. So her here is functioning as our direct object. She's different from they. So we're introducing a new set of information, and the calling is happening to her. So her is our direct object. The functions like a determiner. Never fleeting flower functions as the head word of our noun phrase, but they called her the never fading flower. So we could also say they called the never fading flower, right? It's not a prepositional phrase, it's not a participle phrase. Like it's a simple, straightforward noun phrase that gives us more information about her, our direct object. So it restates the direct object in a new way. And as a result, it functions as the object complement. So that's our noun phrase number 3, because the never fading flower is another name for her. So once again, here we have 3 separate noun phrases. Each one of them is performing a different function in the sentence. The last one that we're going to talk about is the noun phrase as an appositive. And what an appositive means is that it's extra, kind of unnecessary information, linked to a noun phrase. So we're going to be dealing with several noun phrases in this particular example. And I want to talk to you briefly about punctuation. So in these form function trees, I haven't been using punctuation. If I were, there would be a comma here and a period here. And this is important because in this sentence, Hamlin read the 5th poem, comma, the dirtiest one. I like to think about commas as thumbtacks that tack in additional information to sentences that's non-essential information. And by that, I mean, if I crossed out the dirtiest one, the sentence would still make sense. Tamlin read the 5th poem. So what it does is it elaborates. And I will write that here, right? It provides additional details, and they're useful details, but they're not necessary details. So we're going to start once again by doing our forms, and then we're going to go to functions. So Tamlin is a proper noun, which means that what we have here is a noun phrase. Read is a verb, and so we have our verb phrase. The is a definite article. 5th is an adjective. Home is a noun. So we have another noun phrase. So we have number 1 and number 2 so far. Once again, we have a definite article. Dirtiest, we have an adjective, and 1 is technically a pronoun. And so that means that we have our 3rd noun phrase. So now that we have the function of all of the words, and I know it's a little strange, I am going to leave the dirtiest one crossed out just so that it jogs your memory that it's non-essential information. But let's talk about the functions. We have our usual subject predicate split, right? So Tamlin from read the 5th poem, the dirtiest one. So Tamlin is our subject. Read is our predicate. The functions like a determiner. 5th modifies poem. And poem functions as the head word for our noun phrase, right? And so if Tamlin is reading this poem, Tamlin and poem are separate bits of information, which means that this is a direct object, right? It's receiving the action of the verb. Then once again, we have a definite article, so that's going to be a determiner. We have dirtiest, which is an adjective, and that means that its function is to modify one, which is the pronoun and head word of the noun phrase. So the dirtiest one overall modifies poem, right? And since it's non-essential information, that means that it functions as an appositive. So useful, I think, to be able to see those various levels, right, of function of words in a sentence. And what that means then is that the noun phrase that functions like an appositive in this example is noun phrase number 3. So we have 3 noun phrases that all function differently. In this case, the third one is our appositive. And one of the ways you can kind of think about this is that we have an additional branch, which tells you that it is indeed excess information, right? Or extra non-essential information. So those are the various ways that noun phrases can function in a sentence. So hold on to those as we're exploring nouns a little more deeply.